Okay. If somebody give me a thumbs up and say that's okay. Sorry, this is John Haller, Fellowship Bible Chapel. And if you can hear me, just give me like an okay in the chat, and I'll continue. As I said, there's always about a 15 or 20-second delay between what I'm doing and what appears on YouTube. So, okay, it looks like we're going. So I have, I apologize for not getting here on time at noon. For some reason, my camera decided to stop working. I've been looking at other cameras, but those cost money, and I just haven't gotten around to doing that yet. So when I get the money together, I guess I'll go ahead and get another camera that's a little better. So I'm using an old Logitech webcam that I don't really like, but that's the one that I have right now. So it's a number of years old. So is the regular camera that I'm using. I've been working with my camera setup, trying to make it a little bit more user-friendly, so I have a little bit better eye contact and everything. So I spent a lot of time yesterday doing that. And let me just move this down just a little bit. You don't need to see the top of my bald head anyway. So I prepared a bunch of notes, as you can see, about some things that I want to talk about, and I'm not going to get through all of these. So I'm just going to kind of start randomly with some things that are going on in Israel. So we've been having I just want to pull up some scripture passages here. Excuse me one second here. So there's a lot of thoughts that I have right at the moment. And there's a lot going on in Israel, in the Middle East. And by the way, I've been also trying to keep up with what our friends over at the World Economic Forum and the globalists and that type of thing are doing with regard to other things. And but there's not going to be any of that in this update. So I am continuing to research that development of central bank digital currencies, and eventually, when things settle down in the Middle East, if they ever do, I will talk about those. So let me start off with this. I have received a lot of comments, emails, and look, these are emails that come from people's hearts. I understand that. But the concern that I have, and I talked a little bit about this with Olivier Melnick a week ago today. I was on Olivier's show, and then he gave me permission to upload it to my channel, to Fellowship Bible Chapel's channel. And we talked about rising anti-Semitism, and Olivier's got the New Anti-Semitism. He wrote a book called The New Anti-Semitism. And I've seen a lot of that. So I'll just reference one email, and if the person is listening, I'm not trying to denigrate you in my comments here, but I'm going to be very honest with you and speak from my heart. This Israel thing that we see going on right now is, I think, as we move forward in this end time process, is probably, and I said this on Olivier's show last week, is probably going to be the most divisive issue in the church. So I sort of look at this as a scale. On the one end, you would have people who believe that Zionism is the be-all and end-all of everything. And in that, they kind of lose a focus on Jesus. And it's possible, if you hold to Zionism too strongly, that it could become an idol for you. And that's always a concern. On the other end, though, and this is even among futurists and that type of thing, who think that, we're in the end times, the Bible prophecies relate to the future. We're not preterists, although we recognize that there have been certain prophecies that have been fulfilled. The concern that I have, so one of the emails I got was, you don't seem to understand that Israel's apostate and they hate Jesus and they don't have anything. And I understand all that. I know that. I saw a comment on I guess I would call it a Lutheran site in response to a comment that a friend of mine made about, you guys seem anti-Semitic. And they're like, there's nothing for Israel. Israel's gone. God has no plan for Israel. It's just over and done with. And my friend made a comment about, boy, you guys are kind of bringing back the spirit of Martin Luther, who in his latter days, he wrote some of the worst anti-Semitic things in the history of the church. And I believe that thinking of his kind of permeated the church for a while and really was a factor in the Holocaust that came upon the Jewish people in World War II. And when my friend pointed out this thing about Martin Luther in the comments, the response was, well, yeah, have you ever tried to share the gospel with a Jewish person? I mean, and it's sort of like, folks, share the gospel with a lot of people. And in fact, I've seen Jewish people saved. There is a tremendous, I mean, we had hundreds of thousands of Jews come to Christ, particularly through the Calvary Chapel and other movements and organizations. And it was maybe 250,000. Was made privy to some research that was done in Israel by an organization. I have it sitting up on my shelf someplace. And they estimate that within Israel, which used to be 200 Jews were followers of Jesus Christ, that number is somewhere now maybe approaching 30,000 or over 30,000. So to the person who made that terrible comment in response to my friend, I would just say is, we know that when we share the gospel, we're going to get negative comments. That doesn't mean we just don't do it or that we assign a whole people group to not hearing about the gospel. I'm very troubled by that. And so, listen, I understand there's a lot of problems with rabbinic Judaism. I understand that there's apostasy, that they've fallen away from the Lord. But I also know that God has a plan, and it involves a nation of Israel. Let me give you an example of that. In Matthew chapter 24, some of these end time prophecies don't make sense unless you're looking at the world geopolitical situation, and the world geopolitical situation involves Israel. In Matthew chapter 24, there is what I would consider to be somewhat of a hidden prophecy. When Jesus, Matthew chapter 24, verse, I think it's 15. I don't have the passage pulled up in front of me right at the moment. And Jesus says, listen, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, so that raises a lot of things. It's talking about the temple, stand in the holy place, I think is what Paul references. That refers to a physical place. And we can argue about the temple and whether the temple's a good thing or bad thing. But remember, the temple and the things in the temple were to point people to Christ. And so if there's another temple that can be used at some point in time to do that, even though the Antichrist is going to not use it correctly, we ought to be prepared to use it correctly. So I am... So on the one hand, you have Christian Zionism, which can become an idol. I get that, and it's a struggle not to do that. We're grateful that the nation of Israel has been reborn. There's prophecies in Ezekiel chapter 36, for example. The prophet Ezekiel says, listen, God, he's telling what God says is, you violated my commandments, and I scattered you among the nations. And that's not too dissimilar. I mean, 3 weeks ago today, actually, Benjamin Netanyahu stood in front of the United Nations and said, listen, in Deuteronomy, Moses told us about the blessings and the curses. Joshua repeated that when they came into the land after the conquest. But Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we're on the verge of a new Middle East. But I don't think he knew what he was thinking was not the Middle East that we have right now, where everything seems to be falling apart. So you can't go overboard and be a Christian Zionist. But then on the other hand, you can't take your, what I see people doing is, well, Israel's unsaved, they're apostate, they don't like Christians. And I'm just saying is you should not use your theology to give your anti-Semitism cover. And I see that it's endemic in the world and the church today. And so as I said it a few minutes ago, and I said last week with Olivier, I think this thing about Israel is going to be a very divisive thing going forward. And we also have a sheep and goats judgment that's coming based on how you take care of these my brethren. Jesus was a Jew. And so, and I know everybody says, well, that's for, the 70th week or what people call the tribulation period. I try not to call it the tribulation period because I don't think that's an accurate term. But this last period, that's just for that. No, it's a prophecy for now. And listen, we're seeing it right now. In fact, if we go over to, I'm going to pull this passage up because I think this is kind of a critical one. This is, hang on one second. Zechariah 14, because by the way, Jesus tells them in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation, stand in the holy place. Flee where? Flee Jerusalem. And then he says, pray that your fleeing isn't done on Shabbat or in winter. Well, listen, if there's no Israel that recognizes Shabbat, that's in control of Jerusalem at that time, that prophecy is meaningless. So I think there's a hidden prophecy in there that a Jewish state will be in control of that area politically at the time that this happens. And we've seen that happen. So in Ezekiel 36, God says, listen, I scattered you among the nations because you didn't do what I was supposed to do. And what did you do when you went out there? You played the harlot among the nations. You didn't learn any of your lessons. I've spoken on Ezekiel 23 a number of times. Just type in my name on YouTube and Ezekiel 23, and you should be able to come up with some of the passages. But Ezekiel says, listen, God says, I am going to bring you back. Not because you deserve it. I'm going to bring you back because my holy name is at stake, because I made certain promises to you. And the point is, if God will not honor his promises to Israel, why would you believe that God's going to honor the promises to the church? So that's why I think that this Israel thing is very, very important. So you got to find the balance between making Zionism an idol and, on the other hand, this one, making your theology a cover for anti-Semitism. And so I stand with Israel. I would call myself a Christian Zionist. And I get that they're not perfect. By the way, been around to a lot of churches, watch a lot of sermons of people. Guess what? The church isn't very perfect either. The world's pretty imperfect as a general rule. But God does have a plan and a purpose, and he's going to fulfill that. And so one of these things is this great passage in Zechariah 14. Now listen, this is talking about the day of the Lord. And we know the day of the Lord comes with certain cosmic signs and wonders. It doesn't just sort of appear magically out of nowhere. It's got things associated with it. You can read about some of those in 2 Thessalonians 2 and elsewhere in Matthew and the Olivet Discourses. But look at what it says here in Zechariah chapter 14. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, and your spoil will be divided in your midst. This is a prophecy to the nations. For I will gather all nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city will be taken, the house, and I want you to put this in the context of what we just saw happen 2 weeks ago in Israel. Tomorrow morning, it'll be 2 weeks since this horrible terrorist attack. And what I believe the Lord has done is given us a preview of a terrible time. And this was a terrible thing that happened. Nobody, if you cannot declare the evil of Hamas and what had happened, you have a major problem. And by the way, your problem is spiritual and theological, and it's deep, and you need to repent. So listen to this. For I will gather all the nations to battle against Jerusalem. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, and the women ravished. Now, listen, we just saw that in an area that when you have your little red alert app on your phone, I get these notices all the time. I was getting rocket attack notices just 10 minutes ago on my phone. Here it is, Ashkelon. Or it'll say the Gaza envelope, that area that the terrorists attacked in. And it says the women will be ravished. In what religion countenances that in our world today? And did we see that last week? I remember the one gal was being drug out of a Jeep and then put in the back seat. And I've heard she was shot. I don't know, but I think that that's true. And the area between her legs and her backside was, I thought it was dirty. I thought she'd soiled her pants because she was so afraid. She'd been raped brutally. And there's all these indications that they went into these houses and they ravished the women. There's also evidence that they found pills of it's called the poor man's cocaine, Captagon. It's very common in the Middle East. Hezbollah manufactures it and sells it in part to fund its operations. And there's been actually a big dispute between Syria and Jordan about Syria not controlling the manufacture of this drug. It's an amphetamine type drug. Gets people hopped up so they can go for long hours and do things. And Jordan is, there's been a big dispute between Jordan and Syria about Syria not controlling that, the production and distribution of that through its territory that borders Jordan. So here's another part of this in Zechariah 14:2. Half the city shall go into captivity, but the remnant of the people shall not be cut off from the city. So what's happened in southern Israel right now? It's been evacuated. In northern Israel, there are threats from the north. Their rockets have been launched and mortar shells and anti-tank missiles and that type of thing from Hezbollah-controlled Lebanon. I don't know that any have come from Syria yet, but cities have been evacuated. I saw a post by Seth Fransman, a friend of mine who works at the Jerusalem Post. By the way, you should follow him. He's excellent. And Seth was talking about he was up at Kiryat Shimona, which is up in north central Israel, along the Lebanon border. I was there a few years back. I remember I stopped to buy gas and I couldn't figure out how to run the self-serve pumps, and decided I would go over. We would finish our trip over to Nahariya on the coast to see some friends, and they could help me figure out how to fill up my gas tank because everything was in Hebrew. And I called a couple of friends in Israel, and one said, well, I just bought my car, so I don't know how to fill up a gas tank yet. I haven't had to do it yet. And the other, she said, well, I always use full serve. Well, I didn't see any full serve, and I'm a guy, so I'm not going to ask for help. Give me a break. And so we went over to Nahariya. But we drove all the way along the border there. But in Kiryat Shimona, it's a city. There's an amusement park there, like a water park, I think, an amusement park. I don't know how big the city is. I'm going to guess certainly 25,000. I don't know. You can look it up. Kiryat Shimona. Not too far from Tel Dan, not too far from Caesarea Philippi. And so we went from Kiryat Shimona, we cut up, and we drove all the way along the Lebanon border, all the way over to Nahariya. And areas that you wouldn't go now. And Kiryat Shimona's been evacuated. So southern Israel's been evacuated. A lot of northern Israel's been evacuated. the point is, when you see these things happening, and we know that half the city shall go into captivity, and there's also a prophecy that Jesus says, you don't want to be there when that happens, flee. And so there's going to be people taken into captivity. They're going to be probably moved into camps if you play out how this prophecy will play out. So we're getting these little previews of what's happening. Now, the terrorist attack, the statistics I saw recently is about 1,700 Israelis have been killed, and that included Arabs. That included Americans. I think there were about 29, 30 Americans killed in that group. There have been well over 4,000 injured. I think there's still a number in critical condition. In Gaza, the number, and I don't know how much you can believe coming out of Gaza with Hamas, the number is maybe 3,000. I saw a thing a few days ago, it was 2,700. And look, Israel has bombed Gaza mercilessly over the last few days, or over the last 2 weeks. And that is part to prepare the ground for a land invasion, which is still not, at least as far as I know, that is not started yet. So they've called up 350,000 reserves. I've heard that their report rate, what they expected, people, you always expect, well, we'll call up the reserves and we expect 75% to report. And it's like 150% of what they expected, which means there's a lot of people volunteering. And there's people flying from all over the world to volunteer to serve in the IDF right now. But listen, pray that they'll be able to do a surgical operation in Gaza when it starts. I don't think our government is interested in that. They keep saying, well, we want to do a humanitarian aid. The government's releasing like $100 million to, I believe, Gaza. And even on CNN, they said, well, how are you going to be sure that that doesn't go to the terrorists? And the State Department spokesperson, this is from yesterday, said, well, we hope that it doesn't get used the wrong way. Well, that's no answer. And so I have a concern. I know that Biden came out and he said some pro-Israel things and he promised assistance and that type of thing, but I'm very skeptical of this administration. If you remember back to the Obama administration, in fact, I was just reading an old article from 2018 in the New Yorker that talked about, they were looking at the maps that had of the settlements and Area A, B, and C, which were set up by the Oslo Accords. And the article says that they showed them to Kerry and they showed them to Obama. And Obama was shocked at what he saw, that how Israel was kind of taking over larger areas of what they call the West Bank. It's really biblical Judea and Samaria. That led to Obama in December of 2016, after the election had been won by Trump, but before Trump took office. And remember all the complaints they made about Trump after he lost the election and before Biden got sworn in. Oh, what's Trump going to do? He's going to take us to war with Iran, and how dare he? He's going to try to set things up so that he's going to make it difficult for the great Joe Biden to come in. Listen, this is exactly what Obama did to Trump. They went to the UN. There was a resolution being passed or presented to the Security Council called Resolution 2334. And on December 24th or 25th, 2016, the U.S. for the first time refused to veto an anti-Israel resolution. At the time, the UN ambassador from the United States was Samantha Powers. And I've played that clip. I've shown you the newspaper articles many, many times on that. And so that supposedly came because Obama thought that Israel's taking over too much of biblical Judea and Samaria. So factor that in. This is how these people operate. So we're seeing all of this come together. So in Zechariah 14, verse 3, it says, "Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle." So this is giving sort of a summary of this thing that's going to happen in the last period of human history before the millennial kingdom is set up. And it says, "In that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives." Now, I think he comes back before standing on the Mount of Olives, and a lot of prophecies in Isaiah about who is this who comes from Basra, which is in the area of Jordan, Petra, Edom, maybe northwest Saudi Arabia. I think that that's maybe where people flee for protection. That's just my. I think it's a bigger area than Petra, by the way. Oh, by the way, we talked a lot about the Al Aqsa Mosque, and you can see the pictures of them on the Al Aqsa Mosque praying, and everybody says, "Oh, they're bowing towards." By the way, they're bowing their back to where the Jewish temples stood, and we know in Ezekiel chapter 8 that was one of the things that Ezekiel saw and was told by the person who was showing him around the Temple Mount precinct in this vision that he had, that look, they're turning their backs on the temple and praying towards the sun in the east. So the Muslims go up there and they bow and pray towards, it's said, Mecca, but I'm not so sure that it's true. Jay Smith has done a great analysis of this, and if you look at the early mosques, there's one up in Syria and there's a few others around, they don't point to Mecca. They point to Petra. So there's something going on with early Islam that needs to be unpacked. And there's no proof, archaeological or otherwise, that Muhammad came to the Temple Mount and ascended to heaven in his night journey. In fact, Dr. Mordecai Kadar and even a lot of Saudi scholars have pointed out there's no real Islamic connection to the Temple Mount. Now, they've possessed it under the Ottoman Empire and elsewhere, and so they're going to say, well, it's ours anyway because we have rights forever to anything that we possess. But and they changed the Al Aqsa Mosque, which should be the thing at the back end of the Temple Mount, and they've turned it into the entire Temple Mount compound. That's based on mythology. It's not true. And it appears that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia is leaning towards changing that, and maybe if he gets control of the Temple Mount. Now, the Saudis have come out and said because of what's going on between Israel and Gaza, the peace deal is off forever, or it's being put aside. And part of this is the tension within the Saudi political royal family. King Salman is very pro-Palestinian. King Salman's brothers, they're all direct descendants, all the kings of Saudi Arabia since 1953, have been sons of the founding king, King Saud, who died in 1953. When the current king was about 17 years old. And King Saud had, 64 sons, I believe, that he fathered through his many wives. A lot of the kings have been from his favorite wife, including King Salman. But now we're going to move that to a different generation. So the first time a non-direct son of King Saud is going to take the throne at some point. But the current king is very pro-Palestinian. His brothers came up with a thing in 2002 called the Arab Peace Initiative. That included a clear division of the land into a two-state solution. Now, there's some thinking that Mohammed bin Salman wants to depart from that. It's a generational change. But I just don't, and I've said this, and by the way, I say this, and facts on the ground could prove me to be completely wrong, but for now, I'm sticking to it. It's my story, and I'm sticking to it, that the Crown Prince is not likely to change the anything until his father passes away. So his father is 86 or 87, not in the best of health. There's a lot of indications that he suffers from dementia. So we have this. So we have this shift coming. It's a generational shift going on. So I do think the Saudi peace arrangement will come back. I think that. I think Israel will be successful in their ground invasion of Gaza, but I think it's going to be very, very difficult. I pray that it does not occur, but I think you could see Israeli IDF casualties in the 2,000, 3,000, maybe up to 7,000 range, and certainly a bigger number of people in Gaza. It's not going to be easy. There's a whole very extensive underground system of tunnels. When I was in Israel in December, they took us down to the Urban Warfare Training Center. And the Urban Warfare Training Center is a mock-up of Gaza City. And they have mosques and they have graffiti on the walls and everything. And they took us through, they gave us an opportunity to go through tunnels. I sort of asked them what the size of the tunnel was, and it was sort of indicative that someone of my height and width of my shoulders was probably not going to make it through very easily, so I didn't want to get the whole tour group stuck there and have to have a rescue operation to get me out of the tunnel, so I didn't bother. But you can see that this is very close in fighting. It's going to be very difficult. And one of the questions will be, will the U.S. give bunker buster bombs to Israel to allow them to take out the tunnels? Now, that carries great risk with it. I gave you the casualties, 1,700 dead Israelis, 4,000 injured, and now 203 hostages, 11 of which are Americans. And I do not know how this is going to play out. And I think that the recent indications from the Biden administration that you can get money with hostages led to them taking more hostages. It's estimated now that the invasion force that came across on October 7th numbered over 4,000. That included Hamas fighters and a lot of civilians from Hamas that had been working in Israel. Over the past 6 months or so, Israel had been allowing about 16,000 to 18,000 Gaza residents to come into Israel to work every day in different positions. A lot of those worked in kibbutzes there in communities along the border. Many of those, they gave that information to Hamas, and they were some of them were the ones who came across the border and killed the people that they used to work for, because they knew where they lived, they knew where they hung out, they knew where the armory was, where the weapons were. And by the way, there's a huge controversy in Israel right now that I'm probably not going to address right now, as how did this happen? Israel supposedly has touted itself as the most intelligence-aware, intelligence-gathering organization on the planet, and I cannot explain it. There's a lot of theories out there. Eventually, I think some of this will come out. They missed it back in 1973. They supposedly improved their things, but there was a big attack to take out their communications. It was also on a Shabbat. And so I've been trying to piece together, like, how many soldiers were at these 8 bases that were overrun by Hamas and others, and soldiers killed. There were 300 IDF soldiers killed. When we think of a base, we think of a base of like 20, 30, 40, 50,000 people here in the United States, but I'm pretty sure those bases, and I remember them pointing out one when we were driving around there, it's not that big. There's no way. I mean, if it had 100 soldiers, I would be surprised. But I could be wrong. I'm trying to gather that information together. But certainly there were massive intelligence failures and tactical fears. But now let me take to you another area of concern that has been passed along to me by people in Israel. And let me, while I'm doing this, maybe I can just sort of share my screen so that somebody complained that I shouldn't leave the video up. They want to see me instead of the screen and know that it was somebody other than my wife that did that. And let's see. Here we go. So there's the envelope. Of course, Gaza is down here in the in this area, and so these communities along here, there were like I said, 18,000 people from Gaza coming across the crossing here in the north up near Sutter Road to work on each day, and they worked in servant positions, I guess you would call it, hotel workers, hospitality workers, restaurants, that sort of thing. But a lot of them, it appears, were gathering intelligence while they were doing this. Now, the concern is that when you get up here into Israel, here is Jerusalem. We'll come back up here in a second. There's Jerusalem. And then, of course, if we go in, we would find the Temple Mount right here. There's the old city of Jerusalem. But the concern is that in this area, now, some of this area is what you would call the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, that's under the control of the Palestinian Authority, although there are Jewish settlements within this area. It's very complex. And when you drive around there, there's roads that they're called flyover roads, so that the roads for the Palestinian people don't intersect with the roads for the Israelis. And I use the term Israelis not just to refer to Jews, but to Jews and Arabs who live within Israel. But there is information circulating that within the area, so for example, if you go out of Jerusalem and you go north here, maybe 10 miles, if that, actually maybe 5 miles from the Temple Mount, you'll be in Ramallah, which is the Palestinian capital of the Palestinian Authorities area. But there's a lot of people that come from the Palestinian Authority areas into Israel to work on a daily basis, although my understanding from talking to some people is that the West Bank has been closed down for a large degree. But there is a very serious concern, and this may have led to Israel shifting forces up into Israel proper, away from the Gaza Strip, because of concerns not only with terror attacks in the West Bank areas, but potential unrest among Israeli Arabs. And a legitimate concern is that the Israeli Arabs, these are people within Israel, could, elements of them, do this to Israel. In Israel, around Jerusalem and other cities, what happened down in Gaza. So Israel's facing essentially a three-front war. So you have what's going on in Gaza. They're going to invade the northern part of Gaza. They've told people to get out, but there's a crossing here that's controlled by Egypt at the southern tip of Gaza, the Rafah crossing. And Egypt that says, we're not going to let the Palestinians in. If they come in, we're going to get involved in the war. They don't want the Palestinians. If you go to Jordan has come out and said, don't send any Palestinians here. 75% of Jordan, by the way, is probably Palestinian. The queen of Jordan is a Palestinian. So they said, we don't want any of them. And this is the problem, is that, by the way, until the 73 war, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, Gaza was under control of the Egyptians. That changed with the Yom Kippur War. Now it's Israel's problem, but Egypt kept this crossing at the south, the Rafah crossing, and this probably came about because of the Egyptian peace agreement. Anwar Sadat, Jimmy Carter, Menachem Begin. Remember the peace agreement, which led not too long after that to the assassination of Anwar Sadat. So this is a front that they're fighting, and they don't want the Palestinians. In fact, let me give you an example of this. I don't want to get you sick by going around, but if you go to the city of Damascus, and by the way, there's Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. In fact, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, and the Jordan King Hussein at the time, back in, I don't know, 73, they slaughtered thousands of Palestinians, just thousands of Palestinians in Jordan. And they escaped to Tunisia, and they went to Syria. In Syria, now they're Sunni Muslims. Syria now is sort of largely, they have a bunch of different ones. But in Syria, if you go to, here it is, Al Yarmouk, this place here. It's not a large area here in Syria, not too far from the center of Damascus, is a Yarmouk refugee camp. It's the HELL hockey stick whole place, very densely populated, that they have lived in, forced to live in by the Syrian government for 75 years. Now, in 2018, it was largely destroyed by the Syrian government with the aid of the Russians. And part of that was to essentially cleanse Syria of Sunni Muslims, in part because the Iranians want the Shia Muslims and the sect that the Assad family belongs to, the Alawite. And so they bomb these Sunni neighborhoods. You've seen the pictures of them. So a large portion of Damascus, I think in 2018, in a couple month period, about 14% of eastern Damascus was destroyed in these bombing campaigns. Barrel bombs dropped on neighborhoods, people forced to leave. That's how you ended up with all those people going into the city. So this is Yarmouk is in this area. Terrible place. I could show you pictures of the destruction there, and all this part of eastern Damascus was essentially just leveled. And the central part of Damascus, where Assad reigns and everything, is still pretty much intact. But remember, after this started, Assad said, we're going to get involved. I don't know that he can get involved. He's been fighting a civil war now for 12 and a half years. I don't know how strong the Syrian military is. They have the assistance of the Russians. They have the assistance of the Iranians. But they still have a lot of turmoil and that type of thing within Syria that they have to take care of. So I don't know if they are, but Assad said, we're going to get involved. And it may have just been bluster to raise his profile among his people. And by the way, I don't even know if I should mention it. There's a Twitter account, Syrian Girl. And if you want to see some real anti-Semitic stuff, go wade through that cesspool that she puts up on Twitter every day. Everything is wrong with Israel, that type of thing. So, and remember, Damascus is not that far. If you go here from Damascus to the Golan Heights, you're talking a distance of maybe 35 miles from the Golan, Majel Shams, to Damascus, Majel Shams being the farthest north city, town, whatever, in Israel, the Druze community. You can see Mount Hermon here. That's 35 miles. So it's everything's very close. So let me talk about this. So we had this attack in Gaza on a hospital. I think it was down in this region, sort of towards the central. And what happened was so the news comes out and says, oh, Israel airstrike kills 500 at the hospital. It's total nonsense. It's a total lie. That's what Hamas told them, and the mainstream media everywhere watched it. I watched New York Times, Wall Street Journal, a couple other outlets, BBC. Oh, this was an Israeli airstrike. It killed 500 people. It turned the hospital to rubble. It hit a parking lot. Now they're saying there was maybe 10 to 50 killed, not 500. And so we don't celebrate the fact that they're killed. By the way, let me make another comment. So I see these comments. Somebody says Damascus is going to be destroyed. That's a prophecy. I think that's a still future prophecy. So we'll see if it happens. It'll be pretty easy to determine. Whoever's alive at the time will be able to determine, hey, this is the prophecy of Isaiah 17. Damascus will cease from being a city. I don't think it has. There's others who make a case that that's a prophecy that's been fulfilled. I don't think I would do that myself because there's often a double fulfillment. There's a fulfillment that's pretty close, but then there's a final fulfillment that's like really right on all fours, squares up with Bible prophecy. And that's how a lot of Jewish prophecies work. So I think that may be the case. But so anyway, so they said Israeli airstrike. Well, Israel came out, took them about an hour or so, and they said, no, this was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad, fired a bunch of rockets, and they did all of this analysis, and they showed that there was a rocket that did not make it. The rockets that are fired from Gaza have a failure rate of getting out of Gaza from 10% to 30%, depending on how you analyze it. As Palestinian Islamic Jihad, they don't get as much money. Their rockets are cruder. They don't get out. The Hamas has more money, has more assets. They control everything. They're the political power. So if Israel goes in and destroys buildings, there's a big international outcry, and they say, oh, well, here's water pipes to help restore the water system. By the way, the water system is not completely dependent on Israel. They have a desalination plant. They have gas wells off the coast where they get energy to operate the desalination plant from. But Israel does probably control about 10% of the water. So when they say Israel's cutting off the water, it's not making Gaza bone dry. Now, the water system may not work because of the bombing, but that's a different issue. But the Gaza, Hamas controls Gaza, so they get building materials to rebuild. And they take the materials and they rebuild some stuff, probably not to very good standards, and then they take a lot of the steel and concrete and everything, and they use it to build tunnels. So all under Gaza City here will be these tunnels. And so as Israel goes in through there, they have to clear these tunnels. This is a process that will take months, by my estimation. There'll be a lot of gains, I think, in the first few weeks, and understand that the headquarters of Hamas up here in Gaza City is built under a hospital. So there was a different hospital that was, well, it wasn't a hospital. I mean, you can look at the pictures of the hospital. The windows are still intact. How if you have an Israeli airstrike and the windows in the hospital still intact, and you can see where the rocket hit, it was in a parking lot, and there's no rubble. So all of this stuff, it was a complete lie. And so Rashida Tlaib should know this, the congresswoman from Detroit. And she's out there crying, and they had a big pro-Palestinian incursion into one of the Capitol office buildings. Thousands of people, which I guess is okay now, or depending on your politics. So this is, so now the second line of my notes here. See, Gaza was a rocket attack. And you can find the maps. And by the way, I'm going to cover a lot of this in my update on Sunday. I'm also doing first hour. We're in Acts the end of chapter 13 and 14. which talks about Jesus being a light to the nations. And I think there's some things with regard to the Second Temple period that relate to that. And you're going to say, I've lost my mind. Come and listen if you want. That's it. It'll be in the 9:30 hour at FBC, streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble. Rumble is Real FBC. Fellowship Bible Chapel on YouTube, Fellowship Bible Chapel on Facebook. And I'll be talking about that. Try to unpack it a little bit, because I think what I sort of view this tension that exists where you have unbelieving Israel and the believing church, and how does this get fixed? And it's a process, and I think there's a time where it's going to be fixed very quickly. But until then, as I said, I got this email from a lady, well thought out email and everything. And I said, I don't know who you've been listening to, because I don't believe everything Israel does is perfect. I've jokingly said in the past, I don't agree with everything Israel does. I think they should have attacked the Iranian nuclear facilities years ago. Now, I'm being a little bit facetious when I say that, but Israel has an obligation to protect its citizens and people. And so I know that it's unbelieving Israel. I get that, okay? But this stuff that happens in the end times does not make sense without a Jewish state of Israel in control in that area. It doesn't make sense without the Islamic countries in control of this area. Israel now, so what's going to happen with the Gaza invasion? I probably should wrap this up, because I thought I was going to do 30 minutes, and I think I've maybe exceeded that, right? By a lot. And this is, when Israel goes into Gaza, whatever support seems to be part of Israel is going to evaporate pretty quickly. Now, Putin came out yesterday and he sort of warned Hamas, if you guys get involved, Israel will flatten Lebanon. And Israel will. They'll just scorched earth policy. So, but Israel has concern in the Palestinian Arab areas of Israel proper. They have concern with terror cells being funded and supplied by Iran within the Palestinian areas. And in fact, there was I'll show you the document on Sunday. The Palestinian Authority released a document. Caroline Glick and Gadi Tab and some others said this was a declaration of war by the Palestinians on Israel. And the document essentially says we need to call for uprising against Israel and the mosque today. So they had their morning mosque sermons, and we'll have to see. Memory, I'm sure we'll have some of them published. But Israel's support that is among the nations, I think, as they go into Israel, this is going to evaporate a bit. So that's what I think is going to happen. Not a bit; it's going to evaporate a lot. Turkey has already come out very, very strongly against Israel. The Israeli Foreign Office told all Israeli citizens to leave Turkey immediately 2 days ago. Because they believe that there are assassination squads from Iran that have infiltrated into Istanbul, and they're looking for Israeli tourists. And this happened, about a year and a half ago? They had an assassination squad go after some people. So Israel's fighting a multi-front war. So you have Gaza, you have internal in Israel, you have within the West Bank, and then you have a potential front opening up here in Lebanon. So this is, my staff is not very good. I don't have a staff, by the way, to put all this stuff up. And I have tons of graphics that I'm working on for Sunday, by the way. but I'm not going to bother to share them now because I don't want to mess up the live stream any more than it's already messed up. But Turkey is coming against Syria. Jordan has come out. We don't want the Palestinians. Nobody wants the Palestinians. So go read prophecies. Go read Ezekiel chapter 35 about the people who possess the mountains of Israel. And I think this is an end time prophecy, and I think it's one of those ones coming out. There's prophecies in Obadiah that I think relate to the Palestinians, who a lot of them take on the moniker of the Edomites. And so sometimes this is difficult in Bible prophecy because it talks about the Edomites, and then people want to trace where did the Edomites end up. And I think that the prophecies as Ezekiel and these other prophets looked and they saw where these people groups were, they talked about the area where the people groups were, and maybe that's shifted over time, but it's the geographical area that's talking about. So we have all this stuff, Psalm 83, Isaiah 17, Ezekiel 38 and 39. We don't have time to get into today, but there's been a lot of rockets. So there may be three fronts. And I was in a briefing with a retired Israeli IDF person yesterday, Amir Avivi, and he said the big concern right now is manpower. I mean, we can go into Gaza, but if we go into Gaza with 100,000 troops, what does that do to our ability to fight people in the north and to protect the central part of Israel? And this is a big concern, especially as the anger is stoked in the Arab world by these news media outlets that just irresponsibly parrot everything that Hamas had to say. So, like I said, Palestinian Authority came out with a document today, and I'll share images of it on Sunday, that some are interpreting in Israel as a declaration of war. Certainly, at a minimum, it's calling for an uprising and people in the mosque to call for people encourage uprisings against Israel. And this is within the Palestinian Authority areas like Nablus and Jenin and those cities that are terror hotbeds and have been for some time. So I'm going to, if you got a question, I have not been monitoring the chat. So if there's, ask our moderators, maybe you can send it to me, copy questions and send it to me on Messenger and Facebook. And I'll try to monitor that for some kind of that, or I'll try to do it. If you do it, put it in all caps. And I don't want to drag this out because maybe it's just best if I get off here. But listen, this is a difficult time. For example, if you go to, let me pull up my Bible version I have an app on my phone for the English Standard Version. So I know people get really upset about that, and I know the differences, so you don't need to get mad at me about that. I always do parallel translations when I prepare my sermons and teachings. Isaiah chapter 25, verse 30. You therefore shall prophesy against them all these words and say to them, the Lord will roar from on high, and from his holy habitation utter his voice. He will roar mightily against his fold and shout like those who tread grapes against all the inhabitants of the earth. The clamor will resound to the ends of the earth, for the Lord has an indictment against the nations. He is entering into judgment with all flesh, and the wicked he will put to the sword, declares the Lord. So listen, talking about what Bible prophecy says doesn't mean that I'm encouraging it. Good evangelical Christian eschatology, we don't think we're going to bring about the end times. That's going to be a work and moving of God. Islamic eschatology, on the other hand, they think that they can cause it to come. So they talk about this. They will cause this chaos. That's part of Shiite eschatology, which will lead to the coming of the Mahdi. And they said Jesus will come too, but not the Jesus of the Bible. They don't believe in the Jesus of the Bible. So listen, we're coming into a pretty difficult time, and it's so now I've started a debate in the chat about different Bible translations. So my preference, like I use New King James a lot, but I like the New American Standard because it is very, very good at the way they interpret the tense, the verb tenses in Hebrew and Greek. I minored in Greek in college, and I just think the NASB 1995 does a good job. And there's also one that I think Master Seminary has worked on called the Legacy Standard Bible. That's like an update of the New American Standard. I've been looking at that, and it appears to be a pretty good translation. But if you go to Bible Gateway, by the way, and you open a passage, there'll be a little, here, let me show you what that looks like. This is just a Bible study tip. Bible Gateway. So if you go here, you enter a passage like Zechariah 14, and it'll pop up. So here's the New King James Version, but then you have this icon here, and you click on that, add parallel, and so you can go down here, like this selected the New International Version. They seem to like that. I don't like the New International Version. And you could put up, here's the Legacy Standard Bible. And so you can do a parallel train. You can put the King James and all the other translations that you have in there, and it's a great Bible study tool, all free, BibleGateway.com, and just put it in the passage, and again, click on that little icon here, over here on the left, and you'll be able to add a Bible. You'll be given an opportunity to add a parallel passage. I think I've done it where I've opened up 6 or 8 of these. So anyway, so I'm going to, I don't see anything quick here, so I'm going to sign off. Appreciate you watching. So Sunday morning I'll be doing the sermon during the 9:30 hour. There will be a Bible study or a prophecy update at 11. I'm sure it'll be 45 minutes or so, and we'll try to get it done. I'll try to do midweeks as I can. As I said, I was trying to reconfigure things in my office, and I must have done something to my main camera, so I had to use this old webcam. Appreciate your patience with me for getting on a little bit late and hanging in there, and we will see you. I will see you on Sunday. By the way, next week, I think on Wednesday, I'm going to be doing Liberty Sentinel with Alex Newman. I don't know when it plays. It's recorded around 3:30 in the afternoon. So that's I was talking to Alex about that a little bit this week. So thank you. Appreciate it. And I'm going to end the stream now. So God bless. Talk to you in a few days.